Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer. To talk about something I have a hard time defining as, except being possibly one of the biggest, most fundamental issues in the series. Not just in Warhammer 3, not just in Immortal Empires, but in Total War as a series. Because it is a fairly big problem from my perspective on this. Now what do I have here? I have here a campaign as Deathmaster Snitch, turn 2. Is a legendary campaign, very hard battle difficulty, AI stats modifier cranked up to max, so the highest possible difficulty. There's no mods that I'm using over here except like a legendary autosave mod, so I no longer get the performance drops from the constant autosaving on legendary, but outside of that, no Autoresolve mods, no stats mod, no modifiers, nothing like that, right? Just that. Now, this army is the most you can recruit as a Snitch. I took minimal casualties in my initial battles over here because you have a battle against Savage Orcs on the open field, and then you have the Settlement battle. So I took minimal casualties, then recruited 2 Night Runners, 2 Night Runners with slings on the end turn, and also a second Lord. Minimal casualties. And what's important to note over here, the way I did this is like you have a high chance of ambushing this army, so I ambushed this army. In this case, I chose to Autoresolve it. Default Autoresolve, vanilla Autoresolve, because not because it would have been the best result, it wasn't, but rather because you get more experience. That's a problem, but this video is not about the Autoresolve. It plays a part, but it's not just about it. Then I fought the Village of the Moon battle manually. I could have minimized my casualties over here, but I also wanted to maximize my experience because that matters. Well, it matters in terms of the campaign, so I can have Snitch as rank 4, I can have my hero as rank 3. Now, if I look at the diplomacy screen, you can see that my strength ranking is rank 22. Now, this is going to be very important for what I'm about to show, because I'm just going to restart this campaign, and I'm going to show what can happen dependent on your performance, dependent on your choices in a campaign. Okay, so just freshly started the campaign. Legendary, very hard, as you can see, AI stats modifier. And I'm just going to attack this army as I normally would. You have a very high chance to ambush it. Just going to take that ambush over here, get some replenishment post-battle, 6% in this particular case. And then we're gonna take the Village of the Moon. You can already see, like you can see over here how many casualties I've taken. Same battles. The only difference, by the way, between these battles is that instead of fighting the second one manually, I auto-resolved it. So you can see that my units here, my Clan Rats with spears, my Night Runners, one of my God Runners, one of my, like my Night Runners, both of them are far more damaged over here. But outside of that, I'm just going to do the exact same thing I did in the other campaign. I'm going to repair the Warrens, I'm going to build a hidden lair, I'm going to get the Master Assassins. These are, by the way, the moves you want to take in this particular campaign. Like, get Infiltrator over here, get Warp Stars, and that would be about it. Now, and research ferocious plans. Okay, so now we look at the strength ranking, 161. Okay, fair enough. Let's end the turn, though. Let's first end the turn. And by the way, if you're recruiting an army here, you might just want to move it, because when you recruit an army, it has a bit of movement range. Just try and take advantage of that, regardless. Let's see what happens over here. So after the end turn, you can see my units have recovered a bit. Only 4 of them are damaged, and I really don't care about these Clan Rat Spears. But let's take a look at Diplomacy. Strength rank 143. Now, that is a bit absurd. And it is a bit absurd over here. The discrepancy there is too much. There obviously is going to be a discrepancy because I've taken damage over here compared to the other one. But that is a bit going overboard, really. So what I'm going to do is just reload this save. That's going to affect the strength ranking. Let's just see what happens there. Reloading the save gives me this strength rank, 39. Still worse than the one I had when I just fought the Battle of the Village of the Moon manually, but significantly better now that I reloaded the save. To be fair, that the strength rank, the initial one that I showed, was also with reloading a save. I think the game is calculating strength rank when you click the enter button in a wrong fashion, because it's probably not taking into account casualty replenishment. Like, it's taking into account the number of the damage that you will suffer in units, or the missing models in units, but it's not taking into account the replenishment that you will get on the enter. When you reload the save, it recalculates all of that, so it's showing the actual proper number. That would be my personal theory on the subject at the very least, and why I think this happens in particular. Now, why is this so important, and why is this such a fundamental issue? Well, beyond the Autoresolve and casualty replenishment arguments, which I've made plenty of times in other videos, it's also the way you end up playing battles in a campaign. Because if your faction strength is lower, then that changes AI behavior. The reason that changes AI behavior is because it might create a situation where a faction like, say, Lokir, who's relatively neutral towards you, might become either your best friend if you have a high faction strength ranking, or one of your worst enemies in a campaign. And you got plenty of enemies in a campaign like this. And this applies to every single campaign in the game, one way or another. You maintaining high faction strength is very significant, minus the issue of like how the game is calculating it on the intern. Beyond that, and how important it is early on in a campaign to minimize the casualties you're getting. Beyond that, those particular problems, there's another issue. Since obviously it's calculated by the damage that individual units have, or rather the missing models in units have, then you're pushed into a situation in a battle where you want your lords to actually soak up, and heroes, you want them to soak up a lot of damage so you don't lose those models, and your faction strength rank is not affected by as much. You create situations, especially on Legendary, with this significant leadership benefit on the highest possible difficulty of the game with AI stats. You create situations and you create armies deliberately, not to win the battles, no. In fact, that might be inefficient in a proper battle against the proper army, though you're probably not going to encounter many of those. But rather, you create armies for the sake of minimizing casualties in battles, and you use tactics in battles again and again and again. And on the campaign map, you use tactics to lure an enemy into prepared position. You cheese the crap out of the game, because you having a lot of units means the AI is less willing to declare war on you, unless you get really, really strong, which requires a significant amount of territory. But there's a reason I make the point in virtually every video I do, that fighting the initial battles, if they make sense, fighting the initial battles, especially the settlement battles manually, there's a reason why in every single video that I do on the subject of Total War, I focus on the idea of early game aggression. Because if you let the AI, like if you end up falling behind compared to the AI, if your faction strength is not significant, then what will naturally happen in your campaign situation is the AI is going to view that as a weakness. They're going to declare war on you, and they're going to wipe you out. So, take for instance this campaign. I have Xiao Ming over here to the southwest. I have Miao Ying to the northwest. They can both declare war on me. They certainly both hate me. Now, the AI is not going to just declare war based on faction strength. Like, they're obviously going to declare war also based on aversion. So, since Kebie does hate me, and that is very clear, they are far more likely to declare war in general. But when you add in that kind of situation where your faction strength does determine how willing the AI is willing to engage in diplomacy with you, like how willing Lokir is willing to declare war on you or become or make a diplomatic agreement with you, how willing are minor factions to confederate with you, or even major factions willing to confederate with you. Those kind of things do obviously matter during the course of any particular campaign. But what's really fundamentally broken about this is you don't create real armies. You don't. You make armies that are good to cheese the crap out of the AI. That's one of the first problems. The other issue with all of this is you end up using a significant amount of cheese. Like over here, for instance, these greenskins marching around as much as they have because they believed I was vulnerable, and I was obviously not. Like I would have smashed their army there. Means that they haven't recruited any units in all of this time. You might have seen a situation where you have an AI army marching towards your territory and then they suddenly turn around after you click that enter button because your faction strength has been recalculated. So it's a fairly nonsensical system that we have right now, and it's been the case in every Total War game. To be sure, we've had AI like in Rome 1, Medieval 2 especially, but also Empire and others, where the AI would attack you regardless of diplomatic relations just because they felt like it. Absolutely, we have had that dynamic happening as well. And it hasn't necessarily been a great dynamic to see either. But the problem is, like, take for instance this particular battle. And actually I'll just show it, because, like, but first off I want to show the layout. Like over here, I'm not going to charge into the settlement. I'm not going to fight in the settlement because obviously I want to reduce my casualties as much as possible. Well, the way you do that is you cheese the crap out of the AI. And you do this in battle after battle after battle. And this also has an impact in terms of like how you fight field battles, if you fight them at all. Like one of the things you might do in a campaign is embrace the idea that you don't even necessarily want to manually fight any field battle in a campaign, certainly not with these AI stats. Instead, you want to auto-resolve them because that will give you the best result. Like you want to fight every siege battle, ideally in a campaign, minimize casualties, every siege battle, every every minor settlement battle. You want to fight those manually, but you may not necessarily want to fight as many field battles. That's pretty busted, by the way, because like field battles are far more interesting to play than these crappy sieges. But beyond just like how bad some battles are compared to others, it's like the types of battles you're fighting, the incentive that you have in a campaign. Because if your faction strength is weaker, you get factions declaring war on you, less willing to engage in diplomacy. And this affects things like confederations. Let's say you're playing Malekith. I've done a whole thing on confederations recently. But the key there is to maintain as much strength as possible and ensure that the faction you're trying to confederate is as weak as possible. So you being very, very strong as opposed to them being very weak. But the nonsense here is obviously like, it doesn't really matter how many casualties I take over here, considering the fact that like I have good casualty replenishment. We can talk about how casualty replenishment is important. But let me just load this battle here and show you how you'd fight it. Just not because you couldn't win otherwise. No. Not because of that, but because you're trying to minimize your losses just for the sake of this for the sake of diplomacy on the campaign map. Welcome to this particular layout. Oh yes, we have a siege, and you might think, oh, there's a lot of towers over here. Not really. There's no towers that we have to deal with. It's like all we are just going to do in this particular battle is we're just going to move all our guys over here and just attack this particular gate, which for whatever reason CA didn't put any towers over here. Don't know why. I mean, to be honest, it would kind of be like probably just the spacing issue. So we just attack the gate, we just attack those archers on the gate, and that's really it. And then we just spend like half an hour clearing out all of these units in the city. We don't even go that far in the city. We just lure the enemy into coming towards us, because again, you don't want to lose any unit over here. This is why I use mods that disable defensive supplies, for instance, because it's like you don't want to go in the city when there's towers in the city. Of course, you don't want to take that kind of damage, right? Unless you absolutely have to. But do you have to? I don't know. That's where the problems kick in, right? Okay, so that did not go so well. Let's try that again. That was somewhat better, but I killed my clan rats. And the issue here, the fundamental issue, is that you are not incentivized as a player to play fun, interesting battles. Quite the contrary. You're incentivized as the player to cheese as much as possible, right? Win battles with no losses, no damage, if at all possible. And like when you're fighting battles and you're like trying to lose like 10 men against the garrison or something like that, or no men whatsoever, or rats in this case. But when you're fighting battles like that, it just breaks it. It does help if you set the AI stats modifiers to neutral, but siege battles still have like you're still looking at like a situation like leadership and an enormous leadership benefit in sieges. Like just on this difficulty, like AI units have a 20 leadership benefit in sieges. 10 because of the siege itself, and then 10... Like, sieges, I think, would be more interesting if, like, units couldn't route, like, unless the final point was capture, right? Like, units couldn't be routed off the field. I think that would be more interesting. But instead of, like, this bullshit leadership situation, right? So, you could have a better dynamic there. But yeah, that's the problem. Like, it pushes you towards a gameplay style like this, which I personally don't find to be that compelling. But if maybe it would be an idea to have a more interesting campaign if you deliberately decided to not fight like this. But it's like you just end up being significantly weaker. And while it can work in certain campaigns, like certainly Snitch could overcome like the odds here, right? If both Meowing and he certainly can. But like timing a war, a campaign is about timing a war, and you understand like what the AI is going to do, how they're going to do it. I don't know, like in a lot of ways, Warhammer 3 is the best war game that CA has ever released. But when you see stuff like this, and to be clear, it wasn't better in Warhammer 2. Like some people want to say, oh, it was better in this game or that game. No, it wasn't. It was just as broken. We just didn't necessarily have the transparency of information that we do these days. So that obviously had an impact in terms of how we perceive it. By the way, to make this point very clearly, I could win this battle by just charging through the gates. Like, or I could use stealth or other bullshittery in order to win this particular battle. That's not really the point. It's not about winning the battle. Like, winning the battle, like, you fight campaigns where it's not where winning the battle is like kind of an afterthought in the vast majority of cases. It's like you play battles not to win them. You play battles because you have to fight them, because otherwise your entire campaign suffers. And part of the reason we end up in this kind of gameplay style is like Creative Assembly, the way they balanced Warhammer 2 in particular, and also things like Attila, pushed you as the player. And yeah, I know what I'm doing right here is certainly not efficient at all. I just don't care. But I would care in a campaign like, say, Katrin. I would care in a campaign like Malekith, all that kind of stuff. But the problem is, like, when CA designed Legendary difficulty in particular in Shogun 2, and the way they designed difficulty in Attila in particular, or they redesigned difficulty also in something like something like Rome 2, and that's why I despise Rome 2, the way they quote-unquote fixed it. Well, they did, okay, right, they fixed issues, but the way they decided to then rebalance the games, it's like, that's my problem with it all. And now we just have a blobfest. Oh yes, this is where I'm gonna take a significant amount of damage for no freaking good reason. That's fun. Like that's another thing to talk about sieges. Like, it's very easy to, and battles in general, it's very easy to take a lot of casualties in battle. Though I'm not sure what's worse, like sitting on my ass and taking a lot of damage, or doing a lot of damage, but just being bored out of my mind for like half an hour straight, or watching this blobfest. I don't know what to describe as being a worse thing to do in a campaign, really. Neither is particularly great, that's for damn certain. And that's the fundamental problem, really. Like, the way it pushes you towards gameplay, like style like this, because even attacking through the choke point is ideal as opposed to having to deal with all these towers. I mean, you could of course use, and I'm reminded of how CA, like I'm kind of salty over like CA just saying, oh, we buffed the HP of towers and walls and it's gonna make the siege battles more interesting for the attacker. Remember what they said there, for the attacker. How exactly that worked? It's like, well, SFO did it, so clearly it should work. Yeah, you're not SFO. Let's leave it there. You're not freaking... Like, SFO's idea was bad to begin with. Just because they're copying it does not make it good. Just because they're copying it does not make it a good, compelling idea. And it's like mods can help a lot in a game, and I would certainly recommend the Autoresolve mods. But like, mods should not be viewed as the holy grail, because there's plenty of mods that do a lot of stupid asinine things. It's like, yeah, there are some really big mods that I utterly despise because the way they handle the campaign dynamics. Because, like, if you think that this is bad, yeah, there are mods that do it even worse. Because, like, oh, we just want to slow down the player. It's like, how is it ever a fun experience in a campaign? Someone should explain that to me, because I've never understood and detested them, even in things like Fur Day Show or great mod. The way they decided with the garrison script, fuck that. Basically. Screw that. Thankfully, there were sub-mods. Some mods for that kind of stuff. Oh yeah, this was a really fun and engaging battle. Oh, but by the way, fun fact. Fun fact about all of this. Do you know, like, if you start taking these kind of casualties, like you minimizing casualties in battles, like actually impacts the battles themselves, because it will trigger the the balance of power losses. Like if things are imbalanced, like if you do a lot of damage to an army, like you can rout an army quickly. That's not really the problem, but again, it pushes you further and further and further and further into cheese. Perfect. So what do I think Creative Assembly could do in order to fix this? Well, one of the things I believe quite firmly on this subject is, like, the early game should be more forgiving than it currently is. Yes, I've said it. Like, the early game should not be a painful fucking mess where every time you start the freaking campaign, you feel like you have to do something like this. That's one of the first things I would say that ought to be changed about this. Because it really is an early game issue, but even late game, it's still a problem in a campaign. In a campaign, the way it's designed. And yes, I will get a rebellion, and I am certainly counting on getting a rebellion. The feeling when you're like some people will say, "Oh, you're just optimizing the fun out of the game." To which I reply, "No, I'm trying to beat the game." Like this is the thing that has to be said. Most people play in such a way as to win the game. They want to have a good time in playing a game, so they want the level of challenge. Like, as someone who's played Total War for many years, no difficulty, even Legendary is not quote-unquote challenging. But if I play on a lower difficulty, that's not interesting because it just ends up being dull and you just walk all over everyone without any issue. Games need to have some level of challenge to them, but the way Total War handles that is not especially compelling, suffice to say right now. And as bad as you might think as it is in, say, as bad as it can be in something like Warhammer 3, ooh, I would lose. How do I lose that? I'm done. I'm done. This is stupid. There's no way. Like, maybe the Autoresolve should not count, like, not destroy your entire units. Maybe the faction strength should not count individual unit model losses the way it does right now. Oh, jeez, this game, really. But honestly, I would not even use those units. So fine, let's just get rid of them. But yeah, right now Total War is in a messy, messy state of affairs, I think, and that's one of the big things I would look to change right now with the way things are handled, in terms of like incentives, player incentives, because yeah, it's a mess. It's a gigantic mess. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more.